Students often like to ask me whether I'm right-wing or left-wing, and I have a very simple answer. I believe that 99% of humanity has approximately 99% of their interests in common. I believe that as a Marxist, as a Buddhist, as a Nietzschean. Again, given the way that human nature is, given our biological nature, given our social nature, and the nature of interaction between different societies, given all that, at least in this particular moment in time, I do believe that we share a set of common challenges, and therefore we share a common task. And as a matter of my biography, I have been teaching in the university setting for more than 10 years now. And when I try to calculate the amount of students I have talked to, this comes down to the number of something on the order of 10,000 students. And most of these students did not choose me, and I did not choose them. It just so happened that the administration ended up pairing us. And this is a very, very rough estimate, but I would say, well, most students are apathetic and they don't know what their positions are. But among, so let's say 50% is apathetic, but of the remaining 50%, I would say it varies from year to year, but I would say that roughly there was a kind of 25% split of the remaining, right? So 50-50 split of the active student body between, I don't know, people who would broadly identify as left-wing or progressive or something like that, or revolutionary perhaps, and the right-wing who would identify as conservative or something along those lines. And to be sure, I think that there are differences and one has to be attentive to the differences. And when I say that there are common challenges and that we have a common plan, or we should have a common plan for resolving these challenges, I'm talking at a broad philosophical level. I'm not saying that those challenges are easy to identify, and I'm not saying that the solutions are easy to devise. But what I am saying is that as a matter of philosophical principle, this has been my guiding assumption that the purpose of my life as a philosophy teacher is to help people identify the common challenges and find effective solutions. Obviously, I'm just one very small teacher, and so even in the life of my students, my contribution plays a very small part. But that has been my animating assumption. And again, throughout the years of my life, I have not seen any serious evidence to contradict my basic position, again, that the overwhelming majority of humanity has an overwhelming interest in common. And indeed, this was both the guiding principle and the major inspiration behind me recording my Coursera course in political philosophy, Introduction to Political Philosophy. And let me again stress this. I cannot quite emphasize this idea enough, that I feel that all of these divisions between, again, left and right, conservative, progressive, etc., actually religious and non-religious, people who call themselves religious and people who call themselves atheists, to me, all of these distinctions are false dichotomies. And upon closer examination, these dichotomies just dissolve when we actually engage in an open-minded, good faith dialogue, not in fanatical proselytizing, but in a real good faith dialogue, in a free and equal discussion. Again, I think it becomes much more obvious that we have so much in common, and that there's room for productive agreement. And I would actually say that this fanatical, proselytizing, moralistic position is perhaps the biggest challenge to the dialogue, to the real, genuine dialogue. If we believe that we are somehow capital C correct and the other side is capital V vicious, or perhaps even capital E evil, then, of course, no real dialogue is possible. And for me, the very important lesson from all of this has been that we need to have humility. That, again, if there's any conclusion I can draw from studying history of philosophy, is that the smartest intellects throughout the history at times have been spectacularly wrong. And this is especially true in the sphere of morality. And I do not want to say that morality is arbitrary, that anything goes as far as values are concerned. I do not believe that. But I do think that constructing a workable moral system, but also adjacent to it a workable legal system, I would say that this is a complex task that involves many different projects. The project of discovery of what works, of what has worked in the past, of negotiation, of trying to talk to people. And I think that, honestly, in philosophy, by far the worst thing that one can do is just to close one's eyes and imagine that some kind of apodictic ethical system can simply be conjured out of thin air. And just to take an example, a vivid example, prime example of one such approach, is we can look at Immanuel Kant. Not just at the abstract formula of the categorical imperative, which notoriously Hegel called empty formalism of duty for duty's sake. But take a look at what Immanuel Kant himself derives from this formula. Now, in his lectures on ethics, the Vorlesungen, or for example, in the Metaphysics of Morals, not to be confused with the groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. These are different texts. Now, this is a family-friendly podcast, let's put it that way. But, and these are tragic topics, I don't necessarily want to ruin your mood, but, look up what Kant actually, again, thought is derivable from the pure form of the categorical imperative. What he thought was derivable or consistent with it, right? What did Immanuel Kant actually think and write about kingship? Again, in the context of his moral philosophy, about kingship, about feudalism, about serfdom, about the rights of other races and the moral status of other races other than his own, about the legal status of women, about the legal status, for example, of children born out of wedlock. What Immanuel Kant, actually writing not so long ago, after the French Revolution already, what Kant thought of human sexuality and how far Kant thought that it is appropriate for the government to legislate human sexuality, and the specific penalties that Kant endorsed for breaking the laws that regulate human sexuality. And again, notice, in many ways, Kant is cognitively our contemporary. He is writing from a very similar context to ours. And in fact, it is customary to say that Kant is perhaps the greatest mind in the Western philosophical tradition. Now, I do not share this sentiment at all, but it is a widely held belief. But the simple point I'm trying to make is the following. If Kant could have been so spectacularly wrong compared to the common sense of our day in the 21st century on significant and serious moral issues, again, if Kant has been so spectacularly wrong, at the same time being completely sure that he was right, sure enough to publish this in books, then my question is, how can we be so sure of our moralistic stances? And again, often, all too often, I hear people espouse some version of naive universalism. That, okay, perhaps there were some quirks in the application of customs in the previous ages, but on all the major issues, like the issues of life and death, there has been, as a matter of historical fact, broad universal agreement, and that, I think, is just completely and utterly wrong. And notice, this is a serious point of tension between two of my positions. So I'm telling you now, as a matter of historical fact, people start out in very different places, in very conflicting, in fact, mutually exclusive intuitions on the basic ideas of what it means to lead a good life, and let's say what is punishable with the most severest punishments. And yes, I think that as a matter of historical fact, it's true. We begin in very different places as to the vision of what good life is for the individual or what good organization is for society. So if my assumption, which I began with, the assumption of the overwhelming common interest between human beings, if that assumption is true, then there's a lot of work to be done, because apparently we begin in very different places. People start in terms of moral and political philosophy with opposing assumptions, with radically opposing intuitions. And it takes philosophical work. And yes, very importantly, it takes a good faith dialogue in order to try to bring these perspectives into some kind of concordance with each other. What I would be against, though, let me repeat once again, I would be against simple, straightforward principles and simplified, facile rulers to judge moral progress by. Serious moral and political philosophy, I would say, necessarily entails a very strong critical element. And that's, in a nutshell, why I do philosophy. That's, in a nutshell, my intellectual project, to try to discover the genealogy of actually existing moral and legal codes, to try to uncover the contingent unnecessary elements in these sometimes very fanatically held stances. So this would be, you could say, the project of critical genealogy. But then, beyond that, there's a second task, a productive task of the dialogue. Having cast aside the old prejudice, but also, of course, retaining what has worked in the past. Or to put it differently, having subjected to critical scrutiny the social and historical baggage that we have inherited from the past. Having cleared the necessary space, so to speak, we then proceed to develop new forms of subjectivity, new modes of subjectification, as Foucault calls them. We try to help bring into the world the new modes and orders. An ambitious task, to be sure, and at times a dangerous one. But hey, in the words of Max Scheler, philosophy is not an insurance society for the poor in spirit. Dass Metaphysik keine Versicherungsanstalt ist für schwache, stützungsbedürftige Menschen. Take care, colleagues, and good luck to all of us in these crazy and chaotic times.